1 minute ago, the ground beneath 7 million people tore itself apart. At 6:47 this morning, the Hayward Fault ruptured with a force scientists had warned about for over a century. Magnitude 8.2, the largest earthquake to strike urban America in modern history. What happens when the most dangerous fault in the country finally breaks? Why did this rupture exceed every prediction? And with stress now transferred to neighboring faults, is the worst truly over? The Hayward Fault had been silent since October 21, 1868. For 158 years, the Pacific and North American plates ground against each other beneath the East Bay, building pressure with every passing second. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, this fault held a 33% probability of producing a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake before 2043. USGS scientists called it a tectonic time bomb. That bomb has now detonated. The rupture initiated near Fremont, approximately 12 kilometers beneath the surface. Within seconds, the entire 74-mile Hayward Fault engaged simultaneously, tearing northward through Oakland, Berkeley, and Richmond before connecting with the Rogers Creek Fault near San Pablo Bay. The combined rupture length likely exceeded 100 miles. The energy released equaled approximately 15 million tons of TNT, more than 900 times the force of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This was not supposed to happen this way. Previous models from the USGS Hayward scenario projected a magnitude 7.0 event, with the fault rupturing along 52 miles. Research published in 2007 confirmed that the Hayward and Calaveras faults merge at approximately 4 miles depth, creating potential for larger events. Scientists had considered simultaneous multi-segment rupture possible, but improbable. The Earth operates on its own timeline. Ground shaking lasted 94 seconds across the Bay Area. In the hardest hit zones, preliminary readings suggest peak ground acceleration may have exceeded 2G in localized areas, meaning objects weighing 100 pounds momentarily exerted 200 pounds of force. Based on damage patterns, seismologists estimate modified Mercalli intensity reached XI in portions of Oakland and Berkeley, a level of violence that destroys well-built frame structures and throws objects into the air. No living person in California had experienced anything like this. Residents described a sound like freight trains colliding beneath their feet. The ground moved not just horizontally, but vertically, heaving upward by several feet in some locations before slamming back down. Windows exploded inward. Furniture became projectiles. The shaking continued long after people's minds told them it should have stopped. But the shaking was only the beginning. Along the fault trace, the Earth visibly split open. Horizontal displacement reached 8 to 12 feet in portions of Fremont, Hayward, and San Leandro. Roads that had been perfectly aligned now showed lateral offsets of vehicle lengths. Property boundaries shifted overnight. The Pacific Plate lurched northwestward relative to North America, and a movement that would normally take decades of slow creep. Entire neighborhoods now straddle a visible crack in the continent. Aftershocks began within minutes. A magnitude 6.1 struck the Oakland Hills at 7:23 a.m., followed by a 5.8 centered near Fremont at 7:41 a.m. USGS seismologists recorded over 340 aftershocks of magnitude 3.0 or greater in the first 6 hours. The crust beneath the Bay Area has entered a state of profound instability that will persist for months. The structural collapse wave began before the shaking stopped. Unreinforced masonry buildings, many dating to the early 1900s, disintegrated across downtown Oakland and portions of Berkeley. In neighborhoods built on soft sediments and fill, the damage proved catastrophic. The California Geological Survey had documented over 4,380 such structures retrofitted since 1989, but thousands remained untouched. Those buildings are now rubble. Soft-story apartment complexes, structures with weak first floors designed for parking, pancaked across the East Bay. The phenomenon involves upper floors collapsing vertically onto lower floors, compressing living spaces into gaps measured in inches rather than feet. First responders describe removing roofing materials to find bedroom furniture mere feet below. The human toll remains unknown, but will be devastating. In San Leandro, a 4-story apartment building collapsed onto itself at 6:49 a.m., 2 minutes after the main shock began. Witnesses reported hearing screams from within the debris pile for hours. Urban search and rescue teams from across the state converged on the site, but the scale of destruction overwhelmed initial response capacity. Similar scenes repeated across a 50-mile radius. Transportation infrastructure suffered catastrophic failures across the region. The Bay Bridge Eastern Span, replaced in 2013 at a cost of $6.4 billion and designed to remain operational after a major earthquake, sustained damage to approach structures that forced immediate closure. Highway 880 elevated sections failed near the Coliseum, creating scenes grimly reminiscent of the 1989 Loma Prieta disaster, when the Cypress Viaduct collapse killed 42 people. The region's arteries have been severed. Oakland International Airport reported runway surface ruptures and control tower damage. All operations ceased indefinitely. Multiple freeway bridges across Alameda County showed structural compromise, with engineers flagging lane offsets of several feet where roadways cross the fault trace. The transportation network that moves 2.5 million commuters daily has effectively ceased to function. No one is getting in or out by road. Beneath the bay, BART's Transbay Tube faced its greatest test. The 3.6-mile underwater tunnel carries approximately half of BART's ridership, connecting San Francisco to the East Bay. BART completed a $1.2 billion seismic retrofit in 2024, installing an inner steel liner designed to maintain structural integrity even if the outer shell cracked. That retrofit is now being tested in real time. Reports indicate water intrusion in portions of the tube. Emergency pumping systems activated automatically. BART's earthquake safety program was designed to withstand a 7.1 magnitude quake on the Hayward Fault or an 8.0 on the San Andreas. This event exceeded both parameters. Multiple trains became stranded between stations when power failed system-wide. Passengers and at least 3 cars remained trapped in darkness beneath 135 feet of water, awaiting rescue crews who cannot reach them until the tube's structural status is confirmed. Evacuation procedures call for guided walks along emergency pathways, but rising water levels complicate every calculation. The situation underground remains unclear. On platforms above, passengers who arrived for early morning commutes stand stranded without information. The BART system that normally carries 400,000 riders daily has become a labyrinth of locked gates and silent escalators. Downtown San Francisco experienced violent shaking despite sitting 10 miles from the fault. Skyscrapers swayed far beyond their design parameters. Glass curtain walls on multiple high-rise buildings failed, raining debris onto streets below. The financial district, home to some of the nation's most valuable commercial real estate, has been evacuated indefinitely. The Millennium Tower, already notorious for sinking and tilting since its 2009 completion, showed additional lateral movement according to monitoring sensors. Multiple buildings constructed between 1960 and 1994 using a vulnerable steel connection system now face emergency inspection. A 2018 investigation identified 39 such structures in San Francisco alone. No one knows which buildings will be condemned. Across the East Bay, gas lines ruptured and ignited. Fire departments reported over 150 simultaneous structure fires within the first hour. Water mains failed catastrophically, leaving hydrants dry throughout hardest-hit neighborhoods. Firefighters watched flames spread between wooden structures they could not protect. The firestorm scenario has begun. power grid collapse affected approximately 2.3 million customers within minutes of the main shock. Substations shut down automatically to prevent cascading failures. Cell towers lost backup power within hours. Emergency communication channels became overwhelmed with traffic that exceeded system capacity by an order of magnitude. The Bay Area has gone dark and silent. California's Office of Emergency Services achieved full activation before 7 a.m. Governor's emergency declaration followed within the hour, but screens at the operations center showed red across every metric. The scope of destruction exceeded planning assumptions based on smaller magnitude events. This is worse than anyone prepared for. First responders faced an impossible mathematics problem. Oakland Fire Department received over 4,000 calls for service within 30 minutes. The department has capacity to respond to approximately 40 simultaneous emergencies under normal circumstances. Triage decisions that will haunt survivors for years began immediately. Some calls were never answered. National Guard mobilization began at 8:30 a.m. Governor's authorization deployed 6,000 troops, the largest peacetime mobilization in state history. Helicopter rescue operations launched from multiple staging areas, but smoke, debris fields, and damaged landing zones complicated every mission. Some areas remain completely inaccessible. Evacuation orders affected over 500,000 residents. Interstates became impassable within hours. Airport closures eliminated air evacuation options. Ferry services emerged as the primary lifeline for those able to reach waterfront locations, but vessels quickly exceeded safe capacity. People are leaving with nothing but their lives. Red Cross shelters exceeded capacity before noon. The Bay Area chapter reported a shortage of cots, blankets, and medical supplies. Families became separated in the chaos. Children arrived at shelters alone, unable to describe where their parents had been when the shaking started. The humanitarian crisis is only beginning. UC Berkeley's campus, which straddles the fault trace, sustained catastrophic damage. Memorial Stadium, built directly over the Hayward Fault in 1923 and retrofitted multiple times, showed visible ground displacement through its lower seating sections. Dormitories along the eastern campus edge experienced partial structural failures. Students evacuated in darkness, some barefoot, many injured. In the Oakland Hills, saturated slopes gave way within minutes of the main shock. Homes built on steep terrain slid downhill, some intact, others disintegrating as they moved. Longtime residents who had survived the 1991 Oakland Hills firestorm watched their neighborhoods transform into debris flows. The hills are still moving. Maria Delgado and her 3 children were asleep in their Oakland apartment when the building began to shake. By the time she reached the bedroom doorway, the ceiling had collapsed. For 8 hours, she and her children lay trapped in darkness, the smell of gas growing stronger, listening to voices of neighbors they could not see. They were among the fortunate ones. Scientists are now engaged in urgent debate about the events leading to this rupture. In the 72 hours preceding the main shock, seismometers detected anomalous activity across multiple California fault systems. Swarms near Holtville in the Imperial Valley, unusual sequences near Johannesburg in Kern County, and offshore activity near Oregon all preceded the Hayward event. Whether these patterns represent correlation or coincidence remains unclear. Some researchers suggest they could indicate broad regional stress changes, while others caution against drawing connections from limited data. Historical parallels exist but provide little comfort. The New Madrid sequence of 1811 to 1812 produced multiple magnitude 7+ earthquakes within weeks of each other. Southern California experienced similar clustering in 1812. The concept of long-range stress coupling between distant fault systems remains controversial, though recent studies have begun exploring these mechanisms. The question now is whether this event has ended or just begun. The Hayward Fault's stress accumulation history made this rupture inevitable. Since 1868, the Pacific and North American plates have moved approximately 4.5 feet past each other along this boundary, but the fault remained locked, storing that motion as elastic strain energy. Paleoseismic studies documented 5 major earthquakes on this fault over the past 700 years, with an average recurrence interval of approximately 140 years. By that measure, the fault was already overdue. What scientists did not anticipate was full-length rupture at shallow depth with simultaneous segment failure. The resulting magnitude 8.2 exceeded most scenario planning by a full magnitude unit. Each magnitude increase represents approximately a 32-fold increase in energy release. This suggests the event released far more energy than planning scenarios had modeled. The implications are still being calculated. Stress transfer analysis has already begun raising alarming possibilities. The Calaveras Fault to the east, the Green Valley Fault to the north, and, most critically, the San Andreas Fault to the west have all likely received stress loading from this event. Research suggests that when one fault ruptures, it can advance the failure timing of adjacent faults by years or decades, though the exact mechanisms remain an active area of study. The San Andreas Fault's southern section has not ruptured since 1857. Geologists have long warned that this segment, stretching from the Salton Sea through Los Angeles County, could produce a magnitude 7.8 or greater earthquake. USGS estimates suggest roughly a 60% probability of such an event by 2050, though some researchers place the figure higher or lower, depending on modeling assumptions. The southern San Andreas is widely considered overdue by historical standards, with average recurrence intervals of 150 to 200 years. Today's event may have accelerated that clock. Beyond California, the Cascadia subduction zone stretches 1,000 kilometers from Vancouver Island to Cape Mendocino. This fault produced a magnitude 8.7 to 9.2 earthquake on January 26, 1700, sending tsunamis that reached Japan. Geological evidence indicates at least 19 such events over the past 10,000 years, with an average recurrence interval of roughly 500 years. It has been 326 years since Cascadia last ruptured. Scientists estimate a 10 to 15% chance of a full margin magnitude 9 event within the next 50 years. Aftershock forecasts project thousands of additional earthquakes over the coming months. USGS models indicate elevated probability of at least one magnitude 7.0 event within the next year. Buildings weakened by this morning's shaking may not survive additional loading. Residents face months of instability in structures they cannot trust. Sleep will not come easily to the Bay Area tonight. 1 week from now, the death toll will have climbed into figures that shock the national conscience. Missing person reports will number in the thousands. Entire neighborhoods will remain cordoned, too unstable for recovery operations. Economic damage estimates already exceed $200 billion based on preliminary assessments. For comparison, the USGS Hayward scenario projected $82 billion in losses from a magnitude 7.0 event. Over 150,000 structures appear to have sustained major damage based on initial aerial surveys. At least 40 high-rise buildings have been declared unsafe for occupancy pending detailed inspection. Insurance industry analysts warn that earthquake coverage rates among homeowners remain below 15%. Tens of thousands of families will likely face financial ruin with limited mechanisms for recovery. The Bay Area's future has become radically uncertain. The Port of Oakland, fifth busiest in the nation, has ceased operations. Container cranes lie toppled across dock facilities. Ships anchored in the bay await clearance that may not come for weeks. Supply chain disruptions will ripple across the national economy for months as goods that normally flow through this port seek alternative routes. Tech companies with headquarters damaged or inaccessible face decisions about whether to rebuild or relocate. Some businesses will never return. The remote work infrastructure that survived the pandemic now enables permanent departure. Companies can operate from anywhere. Why remain in a disaster zone with elevated aftershock risk and damaged infrastructure? The existential question has arrived: rebuild or abandon? Highland Hospital in Oakland began emergency evacuations within hours of the main shock. Patients on gurneys were carried down stairwells by staff working in aftershock conditions. The facility sustained structural damage that renders portions unusable indefinitely. Intensive care patients required transport to Sacramento hospitals over damaged roads. Medical care in the impact zone has effectively collapsed. Federal response mobilization began before noon. The FEMA administrator arrived in Oakland by afternoon, touring damage zones that exceeded anything in the agency's California planning scenarios. Emergency aid package debates will follow, complicated by questions of building code enforcement and unretrofitted structures. Washington recognizes this disaster will strain federal resources for years. This earthquake will reshape California permanently. The question that haunts every seismologist tonight has no comfortable answer. Has the Hayward Fault relieved enough stress to remain quiet for another century? Or has this event loaded adjacent fault systems toward their own catastrophic failures? The instruments are still recording, the data is still arriving, and the Bay Area sits atop a network of faults that extends throughout California like cracks in a pane of glass. Scientists can tell you what has happened. They can tell you what remains at risk. What they cannot tell you is when the next rupture will come, or whether it will come tomorrow. The Hayward Fault is quiet now. The San Andreas is not.